That's fine. We'll continue. Now let me open the course content which we have, and let me go through it quickly to see what is covered. You can ask me if there is anything specific which you're looking for. Hey Mahesh, sorry, we're not able to hear you. What is selected? Okay, I think if you're joining from the phone, from your mobile, it'll take some time for it to show you that option. Whenever it comes, we can talk about that. Okay. So, is everybody able to look at the Excel which I'm showing right now? Debashish, can you please go on mute?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. As you can look at the, this is our course content. We will follow it based on the order which we have. There are some things which are clubbed with another topic because those makes more sense when we are clubbing them with other options. For example, if you see the Informatica users and permission setup and the best practices for configuring the that is a separate topic. We can club 12 and 13 together. Okay. So there are some topics in this list which might not take 1 hour, but based on the questions we have, based on what I do on the session, you might see scenarios or think of scenarios which would be different in your project, which are valid. So we'll talk about those. We will see how do we set it up if you have a situation like that, which you might be facing in your project, or which you think this could also be a scenario. How do we deal with that? We'll talk about all of those, discuss. The reason I've been asking you to go on mute and talk is to make it more interactive, because it's not that only I'll be talking and you'll be listening to it. So if there is any situation which you think is also valid, and if I'm not talking about it, raise it. Let's discuss. Even I'll get an opportunity to learn from you guys. Okay. So if you'll see the list quickly, demo, that's what we are going through now. Right after the Excel explanation of the content, I'll go to the demo of the current architecture with 9.5. And then we will talk about the domain architecture. What is a domain? How is it set up? How do you install it? What are the basic things which are required for this domain setup and all that? Okay. New features of 9.5. Power Center as it is does not have any much difference, but there are other tools within Informatica which have been clubbed into this architecture, like your Informatica data quality, master data management, or Exchange, and a couple of other data virtualization tools which Informatica has been working. So we'll talk about those things. Okay. Why do we talk about those? Because within the same setup, you have to get all of those services enabled. So if you're aware of those, it'll be good for you to understand how is it set up. Also, you'll be aware of all the products which the Informatica is providing. What is it meant for? How is it related? So that you can suggest your project clients at the right time, saying Informatica has a tool like this which is capable of doing XYZ, and that will be the best for the project and etc. Okay. Administration console. This is the main ground for the administrator to put majority of his work, apart from the basic exploration parts based on it being Windows or Unix. and different services. This also includes how do we set up web services, IDQ services. If possible, I don't have the license yet with me, but if I'm able to procure that before we go to that level, which is maybe next week, I'll also show you how to set up MDM, which is the master data management, which is the one which is picking up a lot of momentum right now, especially in Europe and US. And I'll show you that as well. Yeah, this is normal. Grid overview and setup. For grid overview and setup, we need to have multiple physical machines. Now for this, I can give you in-depth explanation of what Informatica is capable of when it comes to grid. Mostly it is within the system, within the architecture. There is very little an administrator can do. But while doing analysis or debugging something, debugging a long-running job, we need to understand how the grid is set up. Okay. Now for that, I'll be honest. I might not be able to show you how the grids will be placed because we need to have multiple machines, multiple physical machines for this to be enabled. But I can give you explain you the scenario. How is it created? What are the options which are required? What are the scenarios in which grids are enabled? How do you enable them? How do you disable them? And how do you debug a particular long-running job? And how do you make that long-running job to work only on a particular grid which we assign it to? Okay. High availability goes in hand with the grid setup. We'll talk about that too. Now, not always, like I said, a statement that project to project, the environment is different. So it might work, let's say for example, you are in a situation where you have to set up high availability. Now the first thing which everybody does, including me, is to go on to Google and see what is the best practice or see how the steps are to be done. Now somebody says, oh, it worked excellently for me, so I'll obviously try that, but it might not give me the same results. Right, because of the environment or the current setup which my project has or some other limitation. Now in those kind of cases, based on the situation of the project setup, how do we go about having the high availability setup? What are the advantages and disadvantages of setting up or not setting it up? Okay, new licenses. This is one of a task. Majority of the licenses which the companies procure, the bigger ones, whoever is able to afford Informatica, will be taking it for a year or 2 years. So this license upgrade is a small step, but there are pre-steps and post-steps to it. We'll talk about those. Now configuration is easy. If you just want something to be up and running, we can do it in 2 minutes. But what are the best practices for it not to fail even in the high volume situation, or if you're upgrading some patches? What are the things which you have to consider when you're doing that? Okay, we'll see what are the best practices for that. User and permission setup. If you're creating individual users, this is a manual task and you have to keep track of it. The administration within itself does not give us all the options to do it easily. For example, let's say we want to know who are the users or which are the user IDs which have not connected to Informatica in the last 6 months. How will we find that? The admin console, where we manually create the users, do not give us that option. Right? We have to, there are workarounds for it, but there is no direct option for that. So to avoid that, or there is another feature, let's call that as single sign-on, SSO. That's common in most of the big financial or retail companies, where you have a single password for multiple applications. You can set up SSO for Informatica as well using the LDAP. I'll show you the steps. I'll show you what is required, where to do it, how to do it, but I might not be able to show you the actual LDAP because we do not have the Microsoft LDAP or the IBM LDAP setup arranged. We tried doing that in the previous sessions for other participants. That's not working because it's a single server. But in a real situation, what are the items which you need for it to be successfully done? We have all that, and I'll give you all of that information. All you have to do is substitute the server name, the username, password, validate, check if the usernames are being delivered from your LDAP, and act upon it accordingly. User workspace creation. Now this is again project to project. The reason it is there in the list here is it's one of the best practices. You have globally spread projects, right? Now I'm in India and you guys are in US, UK, across locations. Now if you're working on the same component, the handover should be made properly, else there will be a lot of confusion, and during the deadline we will goof up, right? To avoid all this, we have to create individual developers workspace where if I'm working on a component, I will be doing all my work in my own folder. If you're working on your component or the same component, we might have to share so that no other user, let's say there are 15-member team, so only you and me should be working. The other 13 members should be working on their own objects. They should not have an option to touch my component until unless there is some dependency and they also have to work on it. Okay, so this is one of the best practices. It is not a mandate for everybody to follow. Okay, this is the, if you notice, we have clubbed both of these because these are small items. Now again, let's go back to the scenario where you have globally spread projects. Now, for example, let's say you are working in a banking system and the data should not go out of your country, right? Which means the data which the system reads also should read only from that country-specific data, and it should load into that country-specific schema of the database or the data warehouse. It should not load it to outside where everybody can see that and with which the business is lost or the client is lost, right? So how do we bind that username password to a particular region, to a particular area, to a particular schema? Okay. This is backing up user data and restoring it. This is required in two situations. One, you're upgrading. Two, there is some fatal error and your repository is corrupted. If it is the second point, where there is some fatal error and your repository is corrupted, there are quite a few chances of getting it back, even if you contact Informatica support. So we should have a strategy where your repository is backed up at multiple intervals. So we'll talk about those best practices, how to set up. If you're the one who should be doing it, what are the commands which you have to use? Okay. Multiple environments, even this is mandatory. You have development, you have test, you have production, you have UAT. So based on the project you are in, the environments will be 2 to 4. It can be at least 2 because it should have either dev and production or a test and a user acceptance test and a production. So 2 is mandatory, 4 is the max. Okay. So how do you set up multiple environments? What are the best practices you follow? For example, if you have a connection which you have developed in dev, how is that moved across environments? Do you ask the deployment team, or if you're deploying it, or if there is some automation done for deployment, the username password also to be moved from one environment to other environment? There are some challenges to it, and we have the quick fixes as well. We'll talk about all that. OS profiles. This is specifically for Unix environment. If you're working on a Windows environment, and if this option is enabled, it's not much. I mean, it is just there for Windows. honestly speaking, it is not required. But for Unix, it is required. So what are the OS profiles which the Unix systems has? How do we share them? We'll talk about those. This has very little to be explained. It is just a couple of commands to get this enabled, and you start using it. The only challenge comes in when the development team starts using these OS profiles. That's one. Number two is, let's say till now your system is working on only one OS profile. OS is nothing but operating system. Okay? And from next week onwards, your management has decided that it should have two OS profiles for whatever reasons. Now when we split that, then the challenge comes in where the workflows should be enabled with a particular OS. Okay? If not, then the integration service will be confused on which OS profile it should be executing all that. Alright, so we will see how do we set a particular OS profile to a group of workflows for the integration service not to get confused and run properly. Okay, these all can be clubbed together. Repository backup and restoration. Repositories in the file directory structures. Whoever are aware of Informatica, this is a straightforward thing for them. We will talk about, we'll just do a review as everybody's aware of that, so we can club this into something else. Deployment groups and versioning. Majority of the projects do not have a separate deployment team. Okay, it is the Informatica administrator who should take care of the deployment as well. Now it is you who should decide if you want to automate it or do it using the deployment groups. If you have to automate it, there are some pre-built scripts which Informatica provides, which I can share with you. All you have to do is understand the script, customize it as per your project requirement, and use the deployment script. Or you can go with deployment groups if you do not have too much of workflows to be moved from one environment to another environment if versioning is enabled. Okay. Now this 25 and 17 go hand in hand, but then we have separated it because the topics which we talk will be different. Okay. How do we analyze failures? How do we get the error codes? Now, it's sometimes you'll get failures for which you do not have any help in the Informatica help document. You have to reach out to the previous failures in Google, or you have to reach out to Informatica Corporation itself by raising a service request. Okay, but before we go to that level where we have to wait till Informatica support looks at our issue, comes back, we have to make sure that our system is set up in such a way that we know why something is not working. Okay, we will see what are options we should set up for the errors to be generated properly and for us to understand what those are. There is no development required for this. There are some features which should be enabled during the services setup. With this, it is not that we will not need Informatica support. We still have to go to them for some of the other topic. But every service ticket which is raised to Informatica Corporation has a SLA. I mean, I know this is the same for everybody, especially with Oracle and any of the big companies. So that SLA, as per that SLA, if they say if it's critical, we'll get back to you in 12 hours. Within this 12 hours, you'll be bombarded with numerous questions by everybody in the team asking what has happened and why are you not able to fix it, right? So to answer those till the Informatica support comes into picture, what are the things which you need to do? What are the things which you can try? Do we have to do any backups before you try something? If it doesn't work, how do you restore it? All those topics, we can talk about them. Upgrade steps from various versions. In this, we'll first talk about the compatibility. Which current version can be moved to which higher version right now? What are the pre-steps? What are the post-steps? How much development team should be involved in this? How much you alone as an administrator or a team, administrative team, should be involved in this? Okay. Support team. Commands. There is a huge list of commands, and Informatica has given us a beautiful opportunity here to understand those, build those. Now, this I have made it as a single line and only for 1 hour ease. I'll show you how the commands can be used, okay, when those can be used, where you can refer for these commands help, and what is the outcome of these commands. I'll explain you all that. You can explore those things. If you have any questions on that, we'll discuss. Okay. Performance issues. This is one another common thing which the administrators have to do is tuning the long-running jobs. There will be a workflow which might be running more than 6 hours. The client expects it to be finished within an hour. So we have to find out areas of delay. Now that can be within Informatica, outside Informatica. For example, let's say this workflow is waiting for a file which is supposed to be delivered at 9 a.m. but it is not delivered till 1 p.m. So it's not Informatica's fault. It's not the workflow's fault. We have to change the SLA of that file, talk to business, fix it. Now if it is the workflow itself, let's say the file came at 9 a.m. and it has only 10,000 records, but even then, if it is taking 6 hours, either there is something wrong with the code, or there is something wrong with the source data, or there is something wrong with the target data. How do we find all this? What are the strategies which we have to use to show these data points to the clients or for you to understand where the bottleneck is? Okay, that's what we'll do here. This is set to 2 hours as we need to identify the bottlenecks where we have to tell, we have to figure out where the issues are and how do we overcome them, right? Repository and metadata tables. Now, as an administrator, you definitely will have passwords to these. If there is any data point collection of how many workflows use joiner, how many workflows use cache, how many workflows use override SQL. Instead of going and checking one by one, you can write a query. I'll give you a handful of queries and the metadata tables to work on to see how you can join together some of those repository tables and get the information. So this is all covered for your Informatica administration. Anything which you want me to ask in this list? Okay, I take that as a no, and let me get the architecture diagram app. Just a minute, guys. If you have any questions in the meantime, we can talk about this. Just trying to see if I get the right one. I'm looking for the one which has all the information. Okay, here we are. Let me just zoom it a bit. Okay. Now, before you read any of the lines embedded within that system, within the image which you're able to see, let me quickly highlight some of the terms which we need to know. First one is Informatica domain, okay, node, service manager, and then we'll go to the rest of it. Let's talk about these three. Informatica domain. Now this is the base foundation of all of our Informatica installations, either development, administration. When I say all of our Informatica, it is Power Center, IDQ, MDM, and sometimes based on the usage, Power Exchange. Okay, so this is the basic step or the basic component which will first create the foundation for rest of the components to be built upon it. Okay, that's the reason it is called the primary unit, as you can see it on the statement there. Primary unit for management and administration of services, users, and resources within Power Center. Okay, that's domain. What is node? Node is nothing but a physical machine. What do you mean by physical machine? It is, now during the introductions I have asked one of our friends, how many nodes do you work on? Node is nothing but a single box, single machine on which the installation has happened. Now what are the situations where we need multiple nodes or multiple machines? It's the data volumes, or it's the jobs which you are processing on a daily basis. For example, if your project is a huge volume data processing project, for example, the transactions of a bank, the transactions of retail or telecom, whatever it is, if the volumes are high and if your number of processes from which you're pulling the data is huge, then we might need to split the jobs into 2 nodes or more than 2 nodes. There are projects which are maintaining 24 to 32 different nodes. Of course, it's not on a single installation. There are multiple installations to it. Just an example that there are more than 20 nodes which are being managed under a single domain, right? So when I say 20 different nodes, it is nothing but you have 20 different boxes on which you have Informatica installed, and you have assigned X number of jobs, processes to run on each node. Okay. Now in those kind of scenarios, administration is definitely a big task, because any node going down, the jobs which are already running on that should be automatically switched to the other one, or there should be somebody who is monitoring those. If the ETL development team has not created the jobs to be reprocessed at any given point of failure, then you have to figure out what has it loaded, remove all that data, and start it from scratch all over again. Okay, so coming back to the physical machine, you do the installation on this, you do the server installation, and you create the services for each of the node. Alright, now when I say node, it can be on a Linux, it can be on a Windows, or when I say Linux, it includes your Unix, Solaris, all that installation parts, whichever can be done at the Unix level. Okay. Now there are concepts where you run the system both on Windows and Unix, dual node, dual operating system mode, and there are situations where you can install two different versions of Informatica on the same machine on different drives and execute them. Okay, these are all extreme or the next level. Let's first understand the basic part, then we'll go to that. So that is a node. Once the node is there, the service manager should be created. What is a service manager? Service manager is the one which takes care of internally assigned activities to it. Who assigns the activities? Domain. Domain assigns or provides some tasks to service manager, which is running the services which we have configured, and base core services like your logging service, authentication service. Now there is no service for logs and authentication which we will configure manually as an administrator. Those are all by default taken care by the domain and by the service manager. So even if I try to log into the admin console now, there is an authentication process. I haven't configured that. This authentication process is taken care by service manager. Okay, so if you see here, starts and runs the application service on a particular node. The service manager will take care of all of your Informatica services. Okay, now before we go any further, let me quickly log into our admin console here. Now admin console is a web-based tool. From version 7 this was there. Earlier to that it was repository manager, which was the main area for administration. From version 7.1 we have a web-based admin console, and over a period of time, which is upgrade of versions, majority of the tasks have been moved into administration. So there are once or twice in a whole month, whenever the administrator has to do the deployment, they will log on to the tools. Else majority of the work for them is here on this tool, on this web-based tool. Let me log in. Now we are looking at 9.5. Version 9.5. This is the latest version available in the market. This is the one which has your big data plugins where Informatica can connect to big data, pull all the huge volumes, execute all the data quality stuff within IDQ, and then use Power Center if required for all the ETL changes, and then load it into the downstream systems. Which is either your data warehouse, or if it is some other, let's say social media kind of data, whatever requirements they have, they want to put region-specific data into some particular downstream systems and promotion-specific data into some other kind of data mars and things like that. So based on the requirement, we will change all of those. So this is the first window where you can see all the services. Okay, these are all the preview of the services which are running. Whichever you see in red color, those are not running or failed for some reason. Whichever you see in green and gray, green is here, are running. So all the power center activities are running. IDQ services, whichever you see in red, those are all IDQ. Those are not running for whatever reasons. We'll see those. So if you want to see the version, you can go here, and we are looking at 9.5.1, and this is the version which we'll be working on. Now, these are the whole services which we were talking about. So this is the domain which was built as a foundation. On top of it, there is a node. This is the name of my machine, and that's the name which it has taken, and that's the node, right? So like I said, if you need to have multiple nodes, the other machine, let's say I have another laptop, I installed Informatica on it. During the installation process, I can join that to this domain. I can join that node, that physical machine, to this domain and manage it from this admin console. Okay? Same as with the grid. If you have more than a node, more than one node, you can enable grid and execute them. So these are all the rest of the services, and as you can see the tabs here, you have logs, which will give you the centralized logging mechanism for all the services, for all the user activity, whichever you can see. See this here, you have multiple tabs under it again. So you have domain, you have service, and then you have user activity. Monitoring, this is specifically for IDQ. Data integration service, this is for Informatica data quality, to see the jobs which are being executed. Okay, and then reports, it has internally, when I say reports, it is the system statistics. It is not the data reports which we build out of sub-reporting tool. It is the report for the system analysis. How much is the CPU percentage utilized? What are the processes which are running? How many days the license is valid for? And things like that. And the last tab is our user permissions, LDAP security, how do you add them, what are the users, which groups, which roles, what are the OS profiles, how do you manage the accounts, how do you add the LDAP security, and all that comes in here. Okay, now this is the preview of your admin console. Now once we start the content, now each service has properties within itself. We have to understand each of it. What will happen if you change a number here, or if you mark a value as yes to no? What is the impact? Or if you really have to do that, whom should you inform? Whom should you connect to find out if this change is done? It is the development team which is getting impacted, or it is the IDQ team who are working on the reports, and I should inform them that this will break their system. So we need to understand these properties which are specific to the domain, to the node, to the integration service, to the repository service, to the web service, and all the list of services which you can see here on the navigation. Okay, let's go back to our diagram here. So we spoke about domain, node, service manager. Now the internal processes which run within the power center are two main services. One is integration service, the other is repository service. What is integration service? Integration service, okay, let's talk about repository service first. Whenever I do the Informatica installation, either on Unix or on Windows, it requires a database as a backend. Why does it require a database? It needs to create the repository tables, which is the metadata tables of Power Center. So whenever the domain is getting created, it will create around 150 different tables for the domain, and if it is the repository which we are creating, it will create around 500 tables. So based on the version, based on the license which you are buying, based on the features which are enabled within the license, these number of tables will vary. Okay, it can be anywhere between 500 to 700. Okay, now that's where I said in the in here that you can log into your metadata tables to figure out what is happening within the system. Let's say you have 5,000 workflows, and if you have a requirement to find out how many of them are using your cache, then obviously if you start looking at one by one, you'll definitely not get the right number, and you'll definitely need more than 2 to 3 weeks with 4 or 5 different resources, which is like a huge amount. So if you just can pull this data with a query alone for a day, it is a lot more cheaper, right? So I just wanted to show you the repository tables. These are the whole list of tables which are present in a particular installation based on the license which you get. These are the whole list. Whatever you see prefixed with OPB, those are all your list of repository metadata, and some of them will start with REP. So each one has its own meaning. There is no documentation as such on what each table is, what column each means with. So if you are going to do any of the analysis within the repository tables, you might have to end up spending quite some time to understand these tables, how are those primary keys and foreign keys related, and figure out what is being done there. Okay, so that's the reason I said I have the commonly used repository metadata tables queries with which you can join one or the other table to find out what you are actually looking for your project specific data. Okay, so that's the repository service. So what happens now? I have the data in my repository. Now whenever I write something, I write a logic. Let's say I've taken a logic of pulling the data from employee table, those 14 records, and loading them into a flat file. Now this is a logic, for example. So I have created a mapping, I've used a transformation, I've used a target definition, and I want to run it now to pull the data from the table and load it into the flat file. For this task to be done, I need integration service. Okay, what integration service does? Integration service keeps on looking for commands from the client tools, which is your manager, workflow designer, and your monitor. Keeps on looking for the commands from the clients. The moment it receives a command saying execute workflow XYZ, it will take that workflow XYZ using the connection between integration service and repository service. It will connect to the repository service, pull all the information from these tables, which is inserted when you've created it, and load the data into the target. Now that is what is shown here. So let's say I have a employee table, right? I'm extracting the data. Let's say I'm removing all the records which have commission 0, okay, which is the transformation rule, and that transformation is being done by integration service. Now it is integration service alone cannot do it. It has to connect to the repository manager, the repository service, okay, pull all the information from the repository service, and then do the transformation and then load it into the target systems, which is the flat file in this case. Okay, so if you notice here, I know for some of the guys who are new to Informatica, it might be a little confusing, but all we want to learn from this here is it has services because it is service-oriented architecture. Those services will have their own specific tasks where they have to do their own specific tasks along with helping other services to do their tasks. for example. Now the repository service not only takes whatever the developer creates it and save it into the system, but also, if you notice here, it should help the integration service to perform its job. So from the client tool, whatever is happening, all of those will go into the repository service and the repository metadata here. Repository metadata, right? Apart from that, it also has to give information to integration service based on whatever request it is making, right? So the tasks are defined, predefined within the architecture. We are not setting anything up for these services to do it. It is already there. All we have to do is make the jobs on how the extraction should be done, what should be the business validation, and what should be the transformation. Now, as an administrator, we need to understand these services, properties of these services within the admin console, and based on the volumes and based on the requirement, what are the changes which you might have to make, what are the best practices which are available for a particular project, how they want to deal with it. Now let's say the business says, I don't want to use audit trails within the repository, because just stop giving access to developers to repository manager, to the repository metadata, and save some space at the database. That is true, but we also have an advantage of giving this option to the developers to make the project more robust, right? Now, we should be able to educate the clients who might not be aware of all these features that this option is available, and if you leverage this option, you'll have XYZ benefits. Now, if there are limitations where the environment is being shared across projects and you want to implement this for a single project, that might not stay valid. So based on that, I mean, if you want to give some suggestion at a particular point in time, you should know what the features are, how those would work, right? So we need to understand all the properties of it, how are the connections set, and everything for us to talk at the right time. Right, so that's the overview of the services. Now this diagram has a little more than what we spoke, because it has all the write-up. So those are the main services. As it is a demo, I'm ending it here. Once we start the course, we will go through each of the installation, each of the services, properties, line by line. What is it? What if you have not enabled it? What if you have disabled it? What are the other scenarios which might impact if you have not enabled it or disabled it? Okay? Okay, that's for the architecture overview and the demo from my end. We can go with any questions you have from now.